Hey folks, my name is Jeff Atkinson. I'm your host today for Harrell's 15-Minute Friday, and our subject for today is granular versus liquid fertilizer. Which is best? What I hope to take away from today is there's not necessarily a best or worse, but rather picking the right fertilizer for the right reasons is really what's important when selecting either a granular or a liquid fertilizer. So let's get into it. Now, the first thing, as far as which one, picking the right fertilizer for the right use, it's a topic that could go on for a whole seminar series. But the Fertilizer Institute is an organization based out of Washington, D.C. that promotes among other things, promotes the responsible use of fertilizers in both agricultural crops, turf and ornamental crops, and anywhere that fertilizer is applied. And they have a concept called the 4Rs, which stands for the right source, the right rate, the right time, and the right place. And if we're not following these concepts, if we're not using fertilizer for the right reasons, applying them at the right rate, applying them at the right time, using the right source, then it's likely that there may be some inefficiencies in our program that can lead to losses to the environment, or maybe not the plant response that we're looking for. So selecting the right fertilizer source for the right reason is really an important step into an efficient agronomic program. When we start making just the basic comparison against liquid or dry granular fertilizer sources, there's a lot of similarities in the labels, but there's also differences that it's important to pay attention to. So for example, every fertilizer label will have a guaranteed analysis, right? The basic numbers of N, P, and K. So this is a label, Tall Turf. This is a 30-0-0 nitrogen liquid product available through Harrell's. Its analysis is 30-0-0, which means that it has 30% nitrogen, 0% phosphorus, and 0% potassium. This is just a straight nitrogen product. Now you go down below that, you see that there's 6.3% ammoniacal nitrogen, 6.3% nitrate nitrogen, and 17.2% urea nitrogen. That's just a further breakdown of this 30% total nitrogen number. But when you compare that to a granular form, the similarity there is that this is a 30-0-10 label for a granular fertilizer blend on the right, meaning that there's 30% potassium and 30% nitrogen and 10% potassium within this blend. And so very similar in that sense. But when it comes to calculating how much actual nitrogen is in this bag of fertilizer on the right or in this jug of liquid fertilizer on the left, that's really where the differences start. And we're going to get into that here in just a minute. But before we get into actual fertilizer calculations and explaining some differences there, let's look at actually some advantages and disadvantages of both liquid fertilizers and granular fertilizers. So looking at the liquid fertilizers, first, we're going to keep using Tall Turf here as an example. The advantages is they're easily tank mixed with other inputs. So if you're going out there and you're spraying, it's easy enough to put a liquid fertilizer like Tall Turf in the tank with something like a Barricade or Dimension or other pre-emergent herbicide. It can also easily be mixed with post-emergent herbicides, insecticides, other types of fertility if you want to put out some phosphorus or potassium or iron or manganese or whatever nutrient you need. Liquid materials, as long as the appropriate mixing order is followed, liquid materials are often able to be mixed together. Now, the caveat there, it's important to always jar test. If you're making a mix of two products that you've never mixed in a tank before, it's a good idea to make a small scale mix, what we call a jar test, in order to test the compatibility of those materials. And most products, most pesticide labels specifically, will have specific instructions on the label about how to conduct an appropriate jar test. You can mix match these materials to address the specific needs of your area, of your program. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. You can really select the appropriate products to target exactly what your needs are for your agronomic program. Liquid applications do have the benefit of limiting the need to blow surfaces after an application. So, for example, you make a granular application next to a sidewalk or next to a street. To be good stewards of the product, it's a great idea and a practice we should all follow of cleaning off those impervious surfaces, cleaning off those paved surfaces to get granular applied materials back into the soil so that it can be effective to the target application area? Well, with liquid products, you just spray and apply to the areas of target. So you apply to the lawn, you apply to the sports field, you apply to the golf course. You don't apply to the impervious surfaces. So there's no need to have to blow off those impervious surfaces with liquid applications. And liquids are potentially the ultimate in control. Now, if you have the time and labor, now that's the important caveat, right? To be the ultimate in control, you have to make frequent applications of these materials at a low rate. Now, makes sense maybe on a golf course when you've got labor, you got time in your own property, or on a sports field for the same reason. But when you're in a LCO lawn care situation, when you can only visit a property 5, 6, maybe up to 8 times per year, it's not practical to go out to that property every 2 weeks to make a low rate application of a fertility product. It's just not a scalable business model to do so. So you can only visit that property a handful of times. And so while it's potentially liquid applications are potentially the ultimate in control, there's some severe limitations to that, especially in a lawn care type of scenario. Now, looking at the disadvantages, already went through one of them. Frequent applications are required to maintain a high level of control. Nutrient application rates are somewhat limited. Now, as we get into granular fertilizers, you'll see that for nitrogen, if we want to make an application of 1.5 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet or 2 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, if we select the right granular product, we can have that 1.5 pounds or 2 pounds feed for an entire growing season. Well, with liquid products, you can't apply too much nitrogen at one point in time or too much of another fertility source at another time, because that fertility is not as nearly as protected, one, from environmental losses, or two, the potential that it has to cause what we call fertilizer burn or phytotoxic effects on the turf plant or the plant that you're applying to, because that liquid material is in the form of a salt, a fertilizer salt. And when you apply that fertilizer salt to the foliage, if it's at too high of a rate, the salt can actually pull water out of the plant and cause some degree of injury to the plant. So you don't want to call from a customer after making an application and say, hey, you turn my yard yellow or you turn my yard brown, which can often happen if you make too high of a rate of a liquid fertility product. And so you're limited with how much material that you can apply with a single application. You do have time and water are required for mixing, so it's not as easy as, hey, grab a bag of fertilizer, put it on the truck, and let's go visit the job site. You have to take time to mix your tank, add the water to your tank, and allow that to solubilize. And then when you just look at the pure economics of it, if you consider the cost per pound of nutrient, so whether we're talking about nitrogen or potassium or phosphorus, the cost per pound of nutrient is generally going to be more expensive with liquid forms of fertility versus granular forms of fertility. Let's look now at a granular advantages and disadvantages. This is that same 30-0-10 label. So granular materials, they can also be sparged. They can be combined with pesticides. They can be sparged or they can be coated is another way of saying it with pesticides. Now, there are fewer pesticides that are able to be sparged in comparison to liquid pesticides that could be tank mixed. But most of your common ones that we're applying, especially in a lawn care setting, are available for sparging to granular fertilizer carriers. So things like Barricade pre-emergence, Dimension pre-emergent herbicide, many of your insecticides like Acelyprin and Merit and Talstar are options to be sparged on fertilizer carriers. We can also address we can address different nutrient needs with custom blending. So we can blend a nitrogen source with a potassium source, with a calcium source, magnesium source, you name it, whatever the agronomic need is for your situation, we can blend those nutrients in to to address those specific agronomic needs. A single application can feed for months, depending on selection of the raw materials, and not days or weeks, like is the case with liquid fertilizer sources. So you can feed for a much longer period of time. It's kind of a unique thing, easier to purchase appropriate quantities. And what I mean by that, especially for the folks out there that might be just starting their lawn care operation, just starting their business and don't have a ton of acreage that they're out there treating. Oftentimes, let's say if you buy a jug of a pre-emergent herbicide, that jug might be enough to treat 20 acres worth of property. but you might only have 2 acres. And so now you have financially invested in 20 acres worth of product in a liquid, but you only need to treat 2 acres. Well, using granular products, you can buy just enough product to treat 2 acres. You don't have to invest in the product that you're not going to use for several years. So it's easier to purchase appropriate quantities for the amount of land or amount of acreage that you need to treat. And then it will be cheaper in general. Granular materials will be cheaper per pound of nutrition. So 1 pound of nitrogen with a granular material will be cheaper than 1 pound of nitrogen using a liquid material. There are a couple of disadvantages. Not everything's perfect. Your granular materials must be blown off of paved surfaces after application. Again, that's to prevent losses of those applied materials to the environment. And then, as I mentioned earlier, pesticide sparging options are somewhat limited compared to liquid tank mix options. However, most of the commonly used pesticides in the lawn care realm are available for sparging on the dry fertilizer carriers. So let's look a little bit at the calculations, not to get too deep into this, but let's look at the liquids first. This is our tall turf label again that we've been using. 3000 is the analysis. And to find out how many pounds of nitrogen are actually in this product, you have to multiply the weight per gallon, which is found on the bottom right hand of at least Harrell's labels, 10.59 pounds per gallon of product, times the percent nitrogen. So you do 10.59 times 30%, and that provides you the pounds of nitrogen that's actually in a gallon of tall turf. But even a little bit deeper than that, let's say that a typical application rate of tall turf is 10 fluid ounces per 1,000 square feet. And that's typically, in a lawn care setting, that's typically the highest application rate that is applied of this product. So 10 fluid ounces, divide that by 128 fluid ounces to determine how much of a gallon you're applying. Multiply that by 10.59 pounds per gallon times 30%. That comes out to about 1/4 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So at most, at 10 fluid ounces per 1,000 square feet, which again is a typical application rate for tall turf, you're applying 1/4 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So let's say hypothetically you have a 6-round program. If you make an application of tall turf at 10 ounces per 1,000 square feet for all 6 rounds, you're applying a maximum of 1.5 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. Now, for most turf types and most areas and most regions, 1.5 pounds of nitrogen is not enough nitrogen to provide adequate growth through the entire growing season. So you need to do something else, or you might have some deficient nitrogen conditions throughout some portion of the year. Alternatively, this is a 30-010 label, the same label that we've looked at previously. It has 24 units, so 80% of the nitrogen is from Polyon 4300 reg. Now we have a previous 15-minute Friday that is specifically about Polyon. So if you're interested in Polyon, I encourage you to go back and listen to that older episode. But Polyon, depending on the type of Polyon coating that you select, can feed for an extended period of time. So even though with this case, let's say we're targeting 1.5 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet with a single application of 30-010, depending on your region, just to give you kind of a ballpark idea, if this application was applied in April or May, kind of in the southeastern United States transition zone, you could expect this material with Polyon 43 to feed into late July or early August. So with the liquid program, we're having to go out every 6 weeks or so and make an application. With this program, we're making a single application, and we're going to get the same consistent feeding through the duration of the growing season. So if we have a target of 1.5 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, we divide that 1.5 pounds by 30% nitrogen within this blend, and that comes out to 5 pounds of product required per 1,000 square feet, which is a pretty good application rate for most lawn care situations. You also have available to you through your Harrell's representative what we call our Polygraph software. This is a software system that, based on your location, based on historical weather data, and based on the Polyon fertilizer blend that you select, we can predict what nutrient release is going to be on a week-by-week basis. So in this case, we took the same 30-010, had an application date of April 1st of 2024. Location was set to Raleigh, North Carolina. And you can see that there's a soluble component here. There's a quick release component. So we get a nice little kick of upfront greening with 0.3 of a pound of nitrogen releasing in week 1. And then after that, we have anywhere from 0.05 to 0.09 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, 0.09 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet released per week through the remainder of the release period. So nice even growth through the season. Now this kind of takes you into late July into early August. And you might say, well, what does the fall look like with this program if I'm not making another application? Well, with Polygraph, we can stack additional applications on top of one another to see what a whole annual agronomic program looks like. So this is that case here. So you have the 30-010 application here in week 1. As we go across to week 19, this is late July, early August. We make an application of another material, a little bit different blend. Not going to get into the specifics of it here today, but it does have a soluble component. It helps you heal as you're coming out of as you're coming out of the summer season and going into fall. Feeds your turf as you go into fall, and then starts to peter out as you go into winter and the turf goes dormant for the winter time. So just one agronomic situation. I know that the listeners here might have different agronomic situations all across the country. And so that's why it's important to really speak with your Harrell's representative for your region to understand how Polyon, granular fertilizer, or how liquid fertilizer may be best implemented for your specific area, for your specific agronomic needs. So let's look at this as a program comparison and wrap up here. When we talk about Polyon, we can make 2 applications here. This program on the right, a 30-010 followed by a 25-010, and provide 2.75 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. That's a pretty good amount of nitrogen for a program. If we're talking about a fescue or even a Bermuda grass program, maybe a little lean in some scenarios, but it's a good start, at least compared to a straight liquid program here on the left. We're applying tall turf at a 1/4 pound of nitrogen every round of a program. We're looking at a 5-step program here. I know that doesn't fit everybody, but just for as example's sake, if we're applying a 1/4 pound of tall turf with every application, you're looking at a total of 1.25 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet in comparison to the granular program of 2.75 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So with the granular program, you're getting an adequate amount of nitrogen. You're going to have with Polyon, you're going to have consistent release through the entire growing season. But we're not asking you to make fewer visits to the property. Now, if that's your desire, we can certainly design a program to make fewer visits to your property. But if your business model determines that you need to be on the property 5, 6, 7, 8 times per year, you can still visit the property that many times. But now with the granular fertilizer program, make an application in round 1 or round 2, round 4 or round 5, depending on the model of your program. And the rest of the visits are very quick visits. You're making a barricade spray. You're making a post-emergent herbicide spray. You're making an insecticide spray. You continue to touch the properties, continue to see the properties to make sure that your customers have high quality turf, that nothing is being missed, but you're spending less time at the property. And so we look at efficient programs. The number one cost for many lawn care operations is labor. And so we want to ensure that our programs or agronomic programs are designed so that labor efficiency is optimized. If labor efficiency is optimized, that is going to translate into more top line revenue for your business. So with that, we'll wrap up. Please, I encourage you to speak with your Harrell's rep for more information. We'll catch you next time.